Hi, I'm Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV, and welcome to the second season of The Minds of Summer, produced in partnership with the Cape Cod Institute, which brings leading thinkers and doers from around the world to its renowned week-long workshops right here on the Outer Cape. We all know these kids. Heck, they might be our kids. The 7th grader who can't get out of his own way and forgets his backpack at home every single day. The 10th grader who seems unable to complete or even organize her homework. The 1st grader who seems to break everything in his path. The 4th grader who has emotional tussles and meltdowns on a regular basis. We get told they're disorganized or lazy or too sensitive. If they just tried harder, if they learned self-control, if they prepared better. But maybe it's not so simple. With me today is Dr. George McCloskey, psychologist, teacher, clinician, and author expert on learning and behavior, especially on an area of brain activity called the executive function. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
Let me start by asking, the great they that say all these things, are they wrong?
Okay. Well, actually I think they are. We do have this idea, and it's a pretty simplistic one, that these are all choices that brains are making. They just simply have this ability to be able to do what we're asking them to do, and they're just being lazy, unmotivated, and could do it if they wanted to.
Right.
But the real fact of the matter is that brain development isn't that simple. This is really a process that unfolds over time, and the brains learn how to do these things more effectively through trial and error and through learning, also through education processes. And so we really have to be interacting with individuals, with children, to help them understand how to accomplish things that we want them to do, and how to develop strategies for doing them.
Right. Well, you use the term executive function, and I've seen that term a lot. It's almost like a buzzword, and the description that's always used with it is, it's like, the CEO center of the brain. The heck does that mean?
Well, it's and it's the one that's most frequently used. So it's sort of, and it's becoming cliche to the point where everybody say, well, okay, then you have executive function problems. Your CEO isn't working well.
Right.
But that's a little, again, it's oversimplifying. The idea here is that there may be an ultimate CEO of the brain. In other words, there may be a source of inspiration and motivation that you follow.
A literal biological center?
Well, there's a drive. There's a drive to kind of give meaning to life and to have a purpose. And we are finding that there are biological bases for that, yes. But there's a lot more detail that we have to fill in here. So in getting there to that ultimate CEO, I think of it more, the metaphor I use more with individuals is the idea of a multinational mind corporation. The idea being that it's not just the CEO, it's the whole management structure. So the idea here is that you've got multiple layers of management. And you have, and in some levels, you have directors that don't do anything but direct other directors. So we have these differentiated levels of direction within the brain. The simplest one being the first level. Just like management, at the first level of management, you've got a lot of different managers. If you are a multinational corporation, you have offices all over the world, and each of those offices is going to have a manager in it, right? And the CEO has no idea what those managers are doing on a day-to-day basis and doesn't care. He's got his responsibilities for the ultimate, goal. But these individual managers are responsible then for making the workers do what they need to do. Think of the workers as the rest of the brain.
So if it was limited, all these little creatures running around the brain.
and think of them as neural networks. And so each of these little entities are really neural networks that you have to direct and drive to get things done during the day. Now, without a manager, then you wake up in the morning and you'll pretty much do things, and we can do many things on a regular basis if they're habit. If we've done them before and we know how to do them, you can wake up and pretty much go through your entire day with the habits that you've learned and you've done, and not really use your frontal lobes, your executive functions, to drive or direct your behavior much.
You said frontal lobes. That's literally a part of your brain?
Part of the brain, the forwardmost part of the brain is what we call the frontal lobes, and that's where executive functions are housed. The idea here being that there's parts of the neural networks within the brain that are responsible for this directive capacity, and those are in the frontal lobes.
Okay.
So sometimes I use that shorthand version of calling the frontal lobe functions. But there's a lot of other things the frontal lobes do too. not just executive functions. But so the managers are housed pretty much in the frontal lobes, and these are developing over time, and they enable you then to take control. And instead of doing things that you automatically and you do it every day, out of habit and routine, you're able to alter your routines, to change, and to do things differently, to self-regulate. And that self-regulation that you do, maybe in response to environmental demands, things that are happening around you. If you just keep doing the things you usually do, you're not going to have success, right? So you have to say, gee, maybe in this situation I should do something different. And see, now when you begin asking questions of yourself, you're really engaging that self-regulation process. So it's really about the questions you ask yourself during the day.
So how do we get to this point? Is this something learned? Is it something that chemicals release at different growth stages and it happens? I mean, you have a baby blob.
Yeah.
Baby cries. I mean, I know babies aren't blobs, but they're kind of unshaped, still not fully shaped humans.
Right.
How do we get from there to talking about self-actualization?
Sure. Well, it's a long journey, but it is really there's a set of neural networks within the brain that are the rudiments of those are there from birth. So we have our basic frontal lobe circuitry. There's some of it laid down already at birth. But then throughout life, you're developing that. You're building on top of that, primarily creating more connections, interconnections between the neurons that are there. So as we grow and develop, we make more of these connections. And the more of those connections you make, see, it's sort of like those levels of management. They have to integrate. So that you have to send the message down the system to get to the next level of development. But really, we're kind of building it from the bottom up. So that CEO we're talking about isn't there when you're born. Okay. So he really emerges later on as you keep developing. But the lower levels, those first line managers, are the ones you kind of build at the first level of the process.
What are some of those? What are they?
Well, the ability to inhibit impulsive responding, the ability to focus your attention and sustain it, your ability to plan, to organize. All these are considered, I have about 33 of them, so there's a lot of managers at that level, okay? And you can organize them into the subgroups of 7 clusters, so sort of like separate businesses.
So there's something you try, like one of them was pay attention. I'm thinking, again, let's go back to the little baby, and you go, hi, baby, hi, baby, look at me, baby.
Yeah. And so you're training it. Yeah, absolutely, because the key to these neural networks is to use them. And then get feedback about that performance. Now, the environment sometimes gives you feedback about that. You start using it, you get what you want. But then also, we provide the feedback. As parents, as adults, as teachers, we guide the brain as a development. So we ask it to do these things for us. And then the more the brain does them, the more effectively the brain can do them. But some brains have difficulty doing that, learning them and learning how to do that, and need some assistance in developing strategies or assistance in guiding the practice. How to do that. And these are the brains that we often then attribute the idea that they're just irresponsible or, not doing, lazy and unmotivated.
We like to apply moral failings.
Moral failing, character assassination, I kind of call it. It's just like the idea that it's all your fault and you just, wake up and start doing it. But the reality is those brains need to learn how to do that. And they need support. They need some assistance with it. And so that's the key. So we step in here and now we help the brain develop better and gain these capacities more. But see, our model now becomes one of external control. And the idea now becomes we're going to guide your brain and we're going to tell you when to pay attention. We're going to tell you when to plan, when to organize, when to inhibit impulsive responding. See, but now the problem with that is you're their frontal lobe, you're their executive functions.
So when you say don't hit your sister,
you're guiding the show, and or else don't hit yourself, or else now. And so we have that situation where individuals are placed in that situation. So we're trying to guide them, we're trying to tell them and give them direction. Now and that works. Externally you can control brains. And it works really well when you put some reward or reinforcement in there, right? Here's what you'll get if you do that. Don't hit your sister, and you'll get this, right? Or this is what will happen to you if you do hit your sister. So negative consequences too. The problem then is that some brains don't know how to do what you're asking them to do, or you accept your frontal lobe, your executive function direction. So now what happens is they always get the punishment. They never get the reward. And this gets very frustrating, for everybody, because it's like, I thought, all I have to do is set the consequences for you and you'll get in line. And see, now those consequences become that form of external control. But for those who can't get on board with that, we assume that it's a failing of theirs.
You have the stubborn child.
You have a stubborn child, and maybe a conduct disordered child. Maybe there's something wrong with their brain. But the reality for most individuals in this situation is they don't know how to get that out of their brain. They don't know how to get that performance. So now the teaching that we do with those brains has to be more specific. And for some individuals, they really don't know how. For example, modulation is one of the things we do.
What's modulation?
We often talk about inhibition with ADHD, and we talk about how you have to inhibit impulsive responding. But if I tell you you can do something and then tell you you can't do it, see, that's not about inhibition, because inhibition is don't go there in the first place. So if I have an individual that I say to them, I want you to work in groups, and you can talk among yourselves while you're in your groups. Right. Okay, and then we get together, we'll talk about this. And so they go to their groups, and now the teacher calls one student out and says, you know, you need to stop talking. And the student will be very upset and say, but you told me that I could talk. And now the teacher tells me he's very uninhibited. He has problems with inhibition. I'm saying, well, but you told him he could. So inhibition is don't even go there in the first place.
Right.
But you told him he could.
You basically turned it on.
You turned it on. You turned it on. So now the modulation is you need to adjust the volume control. See, so modulation is adjusting the intensity of your perceptions, your feelings, your thoughts, or your actions. Don't stop them. Don't even go there in the first place. It's once you're there, know the range, the acceptable range. And if you're yelling, I'm going to tell you that you have to bring your voice down. Not stop, but bring your voice down. Right. So we're really looking for individuals to modulate. But for some, so I've said to some teachers, one teacher just, out of the blue said, shut up. and the kid is just stunned. And I tap him on the shoulder. I'm observing, and I said, do you know why she told you to shut up? And he goes, no. I said, you have no idea why she said that. He goes, no, she's doing that all the time. She tells me I can do things, and that's something I can't. She's driving me crazy. And I'm thinking, well, she said the same thing about you, so it's kind of a two-way street here. Lots of traffic on this street. But and so the reality was he was talking too loud. Right. And so now the teacher could have, and I said to him, you could try this. You could say, Billy, are you aware of the fact that you're yelling? To which he would have said, no, I'm not. Right. To which she could have said, well, class, was Billy yelling? And they'd say, yes. And you say, well, everybody talk as loud as Billy is talking. See, do you hear that? It's really loud. Right. If we talk that loud, then we can't talk among ourselves. So you really have to use your indoor voice or maybe a library voice, right? If you don't do that, you're going to have to stop. Use your indoor voice, library voice, modulate, or you'll have to stop. So see, here's where you're at, monitor where you're at, find the line, get under it. If you can't get under it, you have to stop. The problem with that intervention, though, was that Billy was always told to stop. The reason being, he didn't know how to modulate his voice level.
So he never even learned he had to modulate his voice level.
There you go. He was unaware of the need, unaware of where he was at, but also unaware or just not capable of modulating his voice level. So we had to teach him how to modulate his voice level. And see, now with that instruction, now once you understand what to do, you can now do it. But if you don't understand how to do it, see, you're always going to get the consequences that are negative. You're never going to get a good reward. And so this gets very frustrating for everyone. So very often our models are ones where we set up the conditions and we say, now here's what we want you to do, and we'll reward you or punish you. But we never take it the other step and say, wow, you don't know how to do that. If we don't teach you, you're never going to get anything out of this. So most of my emphasis in the efforts that I do is educating the brain to do what it needs to do. To understand these managers, understand how to use them and how to regulate them. In other words, how to train the workers in the brain to respond to the manager.
Well, do these workers know how to come online at a certain time in development? And
we've actually been developing, for the first line of management, self-regulation, we've been developing that from near birth. It's developing. 6-month-olds can actually inhibit a little bit, right? And there's a range for all 6-month-olds. Some that do it better than others. 2-year-olds, better than 6-month-olds, right? Again, a wide range of how well 2-year-olds do it, but they do it better than 6-month-olds. 4 years better than 2. 16 better than 4. 40 better than 16.
You hope.
So we're hoping that happens. And so we're developing these capacities throughout life. We just get better at using the same neural network that we had when we were younger. It just myelinates more, it strengthens more, and we use it more effectively. Or not, as the case may be for some individuals who don't know how to activate that network and to get it to act for them. And so that's where the education part comes in.
Well, let me ask you something, because we have these things that are developing, and we have this sort of social structure. And our social structure in some way assumes certain kinds of functions.
Yes, right.
The ability to modulate, right?
Yes,
In
you should be able to do that by the time you're 5. You should have all these things in place, right?
And we also have this trend where, kindergartens are suddenly learning things that first graders used to do. And
we keep pushing down the standards and the demands
so we've got
further and further down.
This sort of social structure, we've got this developmental thing happening. Are they in sync, or are we creating problems being out of sync?
They're really not in sync, and I think there's actually two things happening here, which is one of them is that as society becomes more complex, we need more of these executive functions to function effectively. But as the complexity increases, you need more time to develop them, to understand how to use them. So while we're really the brain is increasing its timeline for what it needs to learn and how it needs to learn it effectively.
Because we need to learn more of it.
Yes.
Right.
We're pushing down the demands for getting started with it sooner. And so now, if you have a maturational delay in the development of these capacities, we're going to notice that much sooner.
Right.
And you're going to look deficient, even though you're just basically all you're doing is developing slower. We think there's something wrong with you, right? And so now we're not allowing the time necessary for that brain to mature because we're making demands on it. You need to start doing that now at age 5.
Right.
And if you think even just like a 30% developmental delay, that can be significant. At 6, you look like you're 4 with some of these capacities. At 9, you look like you're 6. 15, like you're 10. At 21, you look like you're 14. Now, you appreciate how devastating that can be to some brains, if the demands are like that. And so we see for some brains, they need that much time to kind of get on board, which means they're not going to be able to handle the demands that we're placing on them at the age we're placing them if we wait for that brain to get there. So in some situations, at 30, you look like you're 20.
Right.
So if you haven't been able to go to college, right, at 18, you might have to wait till you're 30 to have the executive functions you need to get through the college experience. Now, if we educate your brain, we may be able to speed that development up somewhat, right? But it may still be delayed. So the idea here is we've got a time period where we have to be more flexible with the individual and allow the possibility that it's not forever, just longer than you'd like, right? It's going to take some time to get there.
I mean, is it okay? Like we seem to have this sort of one-size-fits-all kind of model.
Right, everybody's 13, they all go to middle school, or 12, 13, you go to middle school, right?
So it's okay to have differences?
Well, see, every time we do that shift from elementary to middle, middle to high school, there's a ratchet up on the demands for self-responsibility and responsibility, which means greater demands on executive functions. And for some individuals, they're just not ready to deal with that. And so it's not a matter that they won't be able to, it's just they can't right now. And now, orientation, education, allowing them to get time to get used to the situation and know what to do, educating their brain on what to do helps a lot. But for other individuals, they're still going to be behind their peers for some amount of time. And unfortunately, we expect everyone to be able to be there.
Yeah, we do.
Now, we wouldn't do that in physical development. See, we do mental development, but not physical. If you have students that are much different in terms of physical profiles, and you're in physical education, and your boys, you might be trying out wrestling, but you're not going to ask a 200-pounder to wrestle a 60-pounder, right? That's not going to work. So you know that's not right. But yet those kids shower and they go to another class, and then you go into science or history, and everybody has a 6-week project that they have to do. That'll be due in 6 weeks. See, so now you just assume that mental development is the same for those individuals, and they're going to be able to plan and organize to get that project done. But just like the physical development, there's differences in mental development. And the individual that looks physically less developed may have the best executive functions of the bunch.
Right.
And so when you just look at individuals, you can't tell from their physical appearance who has the better executive functions. And this is a problem because kids that look older, we think that they're older. We attribute these kind of mental capacities to them when they may not have them. And that's a real problem. So and it's a struggle for teachers too, because when you look at a child, you don't know their mental development the way you know their physical development.
Well, I actually remember this really clearly. When my daughter was little, she grew a lot. She was tall. And in preschool, she was 2.5 or something, there was another little girl, little Sophia. Everyone always called her little. It was always a pen because little Sophia was little. She was little, right?
Yeah.
And I remember hearing the teacher say, well, little Sophia can do this, and I don't see why your child can't. And I got tired of it, and I finally pointed out that little Sophia was actually 6 months older than my child.
Wow, yeah, and there you go. And this is a big difference. And we have our cutoffs for school.
Right.
And people would tell you, you send your child at the cutoff. But here's the thing. You could be as much as 18 months younger than the oldest child in that classroom at age 5, in kindergarten. And then you realize that, right? Some kids are going to school at 6.5. Some are starting at 5. And when you have that range of development within that same classroom, it's not surprising that as a clinician, I often get referred the children that are the youngest in the class because they seem to have problems. And yet much of it is just a matter of development.
Yeah.
It really is, yeah.
Well, pragmatically, what can we, as parents, as teachers, and as a system,
Well, it's a struggle because there's so much demand today to standardize, to have everything the same, to make sure that everybody's going through the same process at the same time. which is sort of like the antithesis of what we're talking about. So the idea of the ability to allow differences. I like Ken Robinson's work in creative schools. He talks about,
Yeah.
why does everybody have to be in the same grade at the same age? Why do we do that? And of course, it makes it easier.
Yeah.
It's just a lot easier for organization and structure and all the
Yeah.
rest of it. So we kind of have that production model of school, that factory assembly line production model. And what we really need is a little bit looser model,
Yeah.
a little bit more less structure, with the acceptance that brains are developing, and they may be at different paces and different different timelines for that. But it's a struggle to kind of
I saw
integrate that.
I saw that in action. Again, after we left that school, we went into a Montessori school. My daughter was little, and they're 3-year groupings, which
Yeah,
was
a 3-year range.
3-year
all in the
range,
same
and it
room.
was wonderful.
Interesting.
Because in that same 3-year grouping, you would have maybe an oldest and a youngest who would have certain things they both did the same. But a different set of two would have different things they had in common. And it was it's going from there to a sort of all-age
Interesting,
classroom. It was
isn't
a
it? Yeah.
really interesting and very different
and you
dynamic.
learn to develop within the context of multiple developmental levels. And certainly an interesting and more open approach. And one that could probably work on a lot of different levels, but we often don't allow it to unfold that way. A lot of it has to do, when we talk about those managers, self-regulation.
Right.
Self-regulation is how you run your show for the day. Pay attention during the day, plan, organize, do all the things you need to do during that day. But then you say, well, if you do that each day, at the end of the week, you go, oh, there was that thing that I had to do and it didn't get done. Okay? So what you realize now is that those self-regulation managers are just responsible for day-to-day activities. The next level of management, there's a component of self-determination.
Right.
And with self-determination, we need to tie together the self-regulation day-to-day to set goals and say, now, if I need to do something by the end of the week, and that's the self-determination manager says, we need to get this accomplished by the end of the week.
Right.
Now, it needs to regulate the self-regulation managers and say, don't do that right now today, because if you do that, I know you want to do that and fix that problem right now, but if you do that and do this, we won't get where we need to be by Friday. See, so now there has to be a regulator of the regulators to make sure that you're self-regulating in a way that's not just going to get you through the day, but get you through the week,
Right,
and
so you
the
do
month,
a
and
lot
the
of
year.
complexity of task,
complexity.
complexity of timeline, complexity of different outcomes. There's a lot of moving pieces in that.
An incredible level of integration that occurs in the brain, which we're beginning to understand somewhat, but it's so much more effective when I work with clients to use the metaphors rather than get into the details of how the brain's working, because they can grasp the concept here. You've got to be structured, but then the issue then becomes, what is it that you want to do long term? What are your goals for self-determination? Self-determination is about long-term planning, about goal setting.
Right.
And so now I often have to get into that process with individuals to help wake up that manager and strengthen it. And strengthen it. And there's also a self-realization component there too, self-awareness, another manager at that level. Are you aware of what you need to be doing? Are you aware of your strengths and weaknesses? Are you aware of what other people's strengths and weaknesses are, right? You have to have some idea of that in order to begin to integrate that self-regulation process more effectively.
Does everyone get to that phase? 'Cause I'm thinking of adults.
There you go.
I'm not sure.
Whether you're ready or not, there's around age 12 to 14, most brains will jump into this phase. Now, just because you're in it doesn't mean you're good at it. Okay,
Right.
so there's some rudiments of it there, right? From very early, we're trying it out with self-determination. Like 5-year-olds can be self-determined for about a couple minutes.
Yeah, they can.
Right? They can be very self-determined, but then they forget about that, right? And it's self-determined for what? For something right now. So you see it kind of like emerging, but then around 12 to 14, it becomes very, very big in kids' lives. In other words, this is the point at which they want to believe that they are their own boss. Right? And the reality is they are. The curtain of Oz parts at 12 to 14, and a child can come to realize there's nothing you can do or say to make me do anything. Now they're own boss. We're going, please keep the curtain closed till about 18. Maybe 25 would be better, right?
When you moved out, that's good.
But instead it's like you're faced now with this brain that realizes that it's in charge.
That's why middle school must be so terrifying,
It's
because
scary.
you've got all of these kids with this curtain parting at the same time.
Right, and they all want to be their own bosses, but here's the problem. They don't necessarily have the self-regulation to pull that off, right?
Okay, yes.
So integrating that self-determination, self-regulation is one part they have to do, but also recognizing what they can and can't do down here, and realizing they may need help. And also refining that self-determination. For self-determination for what, right? Meaning I want to wear what I want to wear. I want to eat what I want to eat. I want to do what I want to do. Okay, but what do you want to do? I want to play video games 24/7. See, now what you realize is that that is not really a self-determined brain. Because self-determination is at its highest levels is about delayed gratification. See, putting things off right now so that you can get something you want later, seeing into the future. But many brains at that age are pretty much tied to their reward center of their brain, which is what I want right now, right? That immediate gratification. And so when I see that, see, I engage in a process called motivational interviewing, where we begin to engage the child and say, you know, I can help you get anything that you want. You know, I'm not here to make you do what your parents want you to do, or anybody else wants you to do. I'm here to help you do what you want to do. And I can help you get anything that you want or do anything you want to do. I just need to know what it is you want to do. See? And if they tell me play video games 24/7, I don't push back. You know, that's okay. Here's what I would do. Now you're out of school, you're playing video games 24/7. How's it going? See, so you created this self-determined world. Now let's live in it for a while and see how it's going. Would your parents let you keep doing that? I mean, they'd be pretty upset that you're home playing video games all the time. Who's paying for this anyway? Probably them. So if you don't have any money, I have $400 in the bank. Okay, how long would that last you? So after that's gone, see, so you follow through this chain of what you created, this self-determined world you created. Now, let's live in this for a while and see how it goes. And after a while, they begin to realize, wow, it's not going very well. You know, then they'll go, that was a stupid idea. You said it, not me. See, I never push back. I never lecture them or tell them.
But that's the little door opening
them,
there.
Yes, to become more self-realized about how bad this self-determined plan of theirs is, right? And because they're going to get there. So, okay, that's not a good one. So what do you really want to do? So now with 12 to 14-year-olds, with older high school students, we get there pretty quickly. With younger kids, they have no idea about the future. So I'm really trying to build a little career maturity in their minds. You know, what do you think you'd want to do in the future? But that may be a little down the road. How about we just kind of focus a little closer? Do you want to graduate from middle school?
That's a good goal.
You might want to get to high school, right? Would that be something you might think you want to do? If they say no, see, I got to work on that. I have to work on helping them walk through their plan of leaving school early. How's that going? See, so I got to make sure I walk down every path they want to go, and explore that till they come to the self-realization that I need a plan that's going to be better than this. And so now I can help them with that. So they say, well, let's at least get through middle school. So if you want to get to 8th grade and pass all your courses, here's what you have to do this marking period. But to get there, here's what you have to do this week. To get there, here's what you have to do tomorrow. And so I try to bring that future closer to the present moment and say, now, to get that done, here's strategies you're going to need to get that done. See, I can help you with those strategies so you can get what you need to do today, so you can get the places you want to get to later on. So I'm trying to build the self-determination in the brain. Often I find if you can do that with a 12 to 14-year-old brain, very often the self-regulation difficulties we see start falling into line.
Because he's been trained to go down this path.
Strengthened that upper-level manager, and now he's got better control over the self-regulation than he had before. And it was always there, it was just not being utilized as effectively. But now, even with that in place, some kids still have self-regulation difficulties, and now I need good strategies to help them overcome that so they can achieve their goals.
I want to touch on one more of these elements. I know we're running short on time.
Because
it's so interesting.
All day.
But
No
I
problem.
just want to make sure I mention this idea of self-generation, which gets into this sort of ethical and moral component, which is also part of this executive function process.
Well, there you go. So you have this self-determined manager, and he's setting goals for you, right? But then then there's this upper-level manager that has to ask some other questions, because you can set goals and you can accomplish them, but then you just have to start thinking to yourself, gee, you know, is it okay if these goals that I set are really detrimental to other people or to the environment? Or, you know, is it okay for me to crush everyone in my path, you know, to get what I want? You know, because I have these goals and I'm going to get it no matter what. You have to start thinking, is that a good thing? See, so now you're beginning to consider morality and ethics and what's good behavior, what's right behavior, what's appropriate behavior. See, but that's the self-generation manager that's in charge of that. And he's kind of knocking on the door saying, you know, I think you might want to start thinking about these things. But see, many people, you can go through life and never have that manager in place. And, you know, never develop him. So the impetus to do that, you know, we have those questions might arise and you ignore them. See, but so the brain executive function is about the questions we ask. When you ask those questions, you have to open the door for the possibility of saying, yeah, I want to think about that. And see, now we're into the realm of morals and ethics. And self-generated means you develop a self-generated view of yourself that integrates with others in a more moral and ethical way.
And we hope we all get there.
We hope we get there. We hope we get there, right? You know, and there's many things structured in society to help us do that. But some people find their own path, and some people ignore the signals, right? and go on with their self-determined ways. But you know, we know that can be detrimental to the rest of us. And so that's always a real concern.
Well, as we're kind of wrapping up this, can you leave us with a couple of thoughts of things that a parent or a teacher could do that's helpful, and a couple of things that are totally not helpful?
Well, I think adopting a patient stance is one of them, which is we often look for, when we see difficulties like this, we often want to make changes immediately. You know, and that's
Yes.
sort of like the switch is off. We want to switch it on. Let's flip this to on.
Let's just
Right?
go over. There we go. We're
There
done.
you go. And if you're going to do an intervention, make sure that that flips that switch on.
Right.
But the reality is that over time, development is not nice and steady. It's like very, very choppy. And so some parents will say, I saw him do it for a week, and he hasn't done it for a month. And now it's back, and now it's gone.
Right.
So you say, well, that's the way it is, but that's like a process of growth development where what we're going for is more on than off. See, any given time it might be off or on. But the cumulative effect here is over time we're looking for it to be more on than off,
Right.
and as we get older, for that more on to be increasing. So the patience is that this is it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be times when the switch is off, and it could be off for weeks. But then we're working at trying to get it back on. Is what we're trying to do, and so we're just looking for more on than off. Patience is a critical piece
Patience
here,
is-
and the education piece. Don't fault the brain. When you see it's not doing things, the first, and especially if it's going after rewards that it wants and can't get them,
Right.
that's a real tip-off. This is something that's rewarding to this individual. He's not getting it. Say, I'm sorry about that. Didn't realize you didn't know how to do that. We have to get you help to understand how to do that better, and some education here, because it's really a process of education, educating the brain. To be more effective. And if you think of it that way, you just say, what's missing in your education? What don't you know yet to do and how to do it? And now, who can help us do that, right? Because sometimes as a parent, it's very difficult to help in that process.
That
Sometimes
sure
it can, but other times it's better to seek somebody else with some assistance, right?
That is true.
Okay, so know when you need that. That's another piece of it, right?
That's an
know when
awesome
you're
piece.
outclassed and
Yeah.
you need some help.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation, and I don't want it to stop, but it has to.
I appreciate that.
So, with me today has been Dr. McCloskey. We've been talking about the executive function and brain development, and I'm Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV. Thank you for joining us.